Hello class, today we're going over lesson 1.1, how to relate integers to their opposites. So as always, let's start off with our definitions here. First definition I want you guys to learn today is that of an opposite integer. So an opposite integer is an integer that shares the same distance from 0 as its opposite. So here's some examples for you. -1 and 1, -2 and 2, and also -100 and 100. So basically what we're saying is integers are opposite integers if they share the same distance from 0. And lastly, we have the absolute value. So the absolute value of the number is the distance between that number and 0. So for example, the absolute value of 4 is 4. The absolute value of -4 is also 4. The absolute value of -1,000 is 1,000. And the absolute value of 0 is 0, because obviously 0 has no distance between 0. So how can we relate that absolute value to an opposite integer? Well, we could say integers are opposite integers if and only if they share the same absolute value. All right, so our goal today is we're going to learn to identify opposite integers. And we're going to do this using number lines, counters, and common sense. So first off, let's look at some visuals here. So we see here on a number line, we have some both positive and negative numbers. So right here at the center is 0. So if I want to look at the first number 1 here, then to find its opposite integer, I can first see that the distance from 0 to 1 would be 1 unit, or the absolute value of 1 there. Now, the distance from -1 to 0 would be the absolute value of -1, and these will be equal to each other. The absolute value of -1 is equal to the absolute value of 1 because they both have 1 distance from 0. And this can be true for all other numbers here. So for example, if I want to find the opposite integer of 2, that is 1, 2 spots from 0, I'll just have to find what's 1, 2 spots in the left direction, which is -2. And again, -3 would be the opposite of 3, +4 would be the opposite of -4, and -5 would be the opposite of +5. All right, so pretty straightforward, right? Another way we could look at this is with counters. So for example, if I were to say red circles are positive numbers and black circles are negative numbers, if I have 3 red counters like this, how could I find the opposite of 3? What I could do is I could fill in the exact same amount of counters here. So I have 1, 2, 3. So if we keep track of this, remember we said we had 3 positive numbers, and now once we've drawn in our opposites, we now have 3 negative numbers. So this is a positive 3 and a -3. And we know that these are opposite integers because they relate 1 to 1. Alrighty. So we want to use a number line to find the opposite integers. First off, let's find the opposite integer of 3. All right, so here's 3 right here. We notice that that is 1, 2, 3 spots from 0. So now I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 spots in the other direction, and I will land at -3. So that means the opposite integer of +3 is -3. How about if we start with a negative number, though? What if, for example, we start with -2? Well, let's look at it. Well, -2 is 1, 2 spots from 0. So if I go that same 1, 2 spots in the right direction to +2, then we see that the opposite integer of -2 would be +2. So the opposite integer of -2 is +2. Okay, a couple more slides here. We got some practice problems. We want to find the opposite integer of -5, the opposite integer of 8, and the opposite integer of -2,000. So go ahead and pause this video and try that out on your own. All right, if you've been checking through here, the opposite integer of -5 would of course be +5. The opposite integer of +8 would be -8. And the opposite integer of -2,000 would also be +2,000. Really quickly, I want to go over some other stuff as well. If we were talking about opposite numbers, not just integers, but we expand this to rational numbers and fractions, the same is true for something like this. If I want to find the opposite of +1/4, then the opposite number would be -1/4. If I want to find the opposite of 0.5, then the opposite would be -0.5. So really, to find the opposite integer, we just have to put a negative or a positive sign in front of the other integer. All right, so in conclusion today, we learned about opposite integers, absolute values, and finally some manipulatives such as counters and number lines and how we can use them. Now, I'd like you to write 2 complete sentences in a conclusion, about what you learned today. And hey, it might help to write this as if you were explaining it to another student. Remember, if you were struggling, if you need to make sure you have 2 questions on this, so either write something down or highlight something, but you'll need to have 2 questions for tomorrow. Alrighty, everybody, I'll see you guys in class tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, y'all.